Remakes aren't usually an exciting affair, but when Robert Eggers is at the helm, you know it'll be something special, especially with a work like Nosferatu, because that allows Eggers to flex his historical muscles, rendering a time gone by in impressive detail, while trying as hard as he can to avoid a modern lens. But maybe more importantly, it's the perfect fit because Nosferatu wrestles with material Eggers is uniquely qualified for. Evil. Vampires are the undead who feed on life, not creatures who choose to kill, but killers by their very nature. In Eggers' take, he does not let you forget this, because Count Orlok never takes a more dashing form, but instead looks like the rotting corpse that he is, and his idea of wooing Ellen is threatening to kill everyone she loves, or even just kind of knows until she submits. Eggers' Nosferatu succeeds in returning vampires to the horror genre after years of romanticism. There were aspects of the movie, especially in the middle act, which didn't completely work for me. Listen to my podcast for more detail, but I do think the film succeeded in a couple of the most important areas, in its atmosphere and in imbuing the story with new meaning, thanks to a crucial change from the source material. A change from both the original Dracula text by Bram Stoker and 1922's Nosferatu. In Eggers' telling, he has crafted a new origin for the vampire's fixation on Ellen, Nosferatu's version of Dracula's Mina. In case you need it, here's your spoiler warning for Nosferatu. In the opening scene, for reasons revealed later on, Ellen is lonely and isolated. She is desperate enough for company that she calls out into the night for a guardian angel, spirit of comfort, spirit of any celestial sphere, anything. The call awakens Orlok from eternal darkness, and he does offer comfort, but it'll come at a cost. He tells her, "You are not for the living. You are not for humankind. And shall you be with me ever eternally? Do you swear it?" She answers him, "I swear." As Eggers described in his interview with CBS, in 1922's Nosferatu, Ellen emerges as a main character by the end of the story. In his take, it's her story from the beginning. But this is not simply a rearranging of protagonists. It also adds new meaning to the classic tale, which we're going to unpack. By the way, since the movie is still in theaters, I'm pretty limited on the amount of footage I can use, so please forgive the gratuitous use of public domain footage from the 1922 version. In the same CBS interview, Eggers expands on why he is so fascinated by the darkness. In his answer, he quotes director John Huston's answer from when he was asked a similar question 40 years ago. His answer, "The dark pearl glistens." As Eggers interprets it, there is something beautiful and compelling in darkness. In Nosferatu, Ellen is drawn into darkness too, and no one can explain it. At a young age, she was strangely in tune with the otherworldly. She would have spells where her spirit wandered off. She knew what her Christmas gifts would be before opening them, and she knew when her mother would pass. It seems her father never tried to understand any of this or help her through it. Instead, he was frightened by her, and did what so many other men will do to her in the years to follow: ignore her, or actively quiet her. Early in the movie, Ellen tells Thomas about a nightmare. It was their wedding day, but instead of him at the altar, she found Death. She and Death looked at the guests. They were all dead, and she was never happier than in that moment. Thomas offers the comfort of a hug, but at the same time offers the same thing her father did: repression. First, he tries to stop her from telling him the details of her dream to begin with. He reminds her what the doctors said, how they need to put these difficulties behind them. But she insists on telling him, and after that, he only tells her to never speak of these things aloud. After Thomas leaves for Castle Orlok, Ellen is left with the Hardings. She worries about her husband, and Anna listens with empathy. Anna's husband, Frederick, does not. He is mostly just annoyed. When she starts sleepwalking and seizing, Dr. Sievers offers a corset, ether, and should things worsen, he recommends Frederick tie her to the bed. One image that sums up a core theme of this movie is the one of Dr. Sievers' thick hand pushing an ether-soaked cloth over Ellen's mouth when she starts to speak in her sleep. In this story, Ellen has been dealing with something very real, beyond anyone's understanding, so she was driven into isolation. Eggers praised the original Nosferatu for simplifying the Dracula story, almost turning it into a fairy tale. And fairy tales are often used to distill real dangers into vivid, exaggerated forms to make them more memorable and psychologically resonant. The rotting corpse of Count Orlok, who slurps blood from your chest, definitely fits that description. So what danger does he represent? The dark form of the Nosferatu conjures broad ideas like evil and the unknown, but through the lens of a fairy tale, cautioning against something specific, he represents exactly what he is in the story. The consequences of repression. Ellen's darkness was ignored and pushed down, driving her to isolation, opening her up to the Nosferatu, a danger to her and everyone around her. That is what repression does. When someone is shamed for a part of themselves, the resulting alienation and isolation can make them vulnerable to manipulation. They may gravitate to any source of comfort, anyone who is willing to accept that part of them, even if he's a vampire who takes advantage of their desperation to fulfill his own carnal desire and bloodlust. Lily Rose Depp talked to USA Today about her character and described the ending as heartbreaking and kind of bittersweet in a way, because she's doing a good deed and she's breaking the curse, but she's also indulging in a dark desire that she has. That dark desire stems from her childhood isolation, where a Nosferatu was the only one who could understand her darker side. She might have given in to that desire once, but when Orlok returns, things have changed. Despite her dark desire and nightly dreams of the monster, despite the isolation and shame which once drew her to him, she unambiguously tells him no. Unfortunately, when someone like Orlok feels his power and control under threat, he is at his most dangerous. He no longer relies on Ellen's emotional vulnerability. Instead, he relies on his own physical and mystical strength. He kills her loved ones, unleashes the plague, and threatens Thomas's life until she comes to him. Like any fairy tale, it's fictional and exaggerated, but has the shape of real human experiences and relationships. If Orlok represents the consequences of repression, that leads to a question. Repression of what? In the story, it's Ellen's dark, spiritual side that's repressed. Or as Eggers puts it in his interview with BFI, she has an understanding of the other side of the world that she cannot articulate.
So she's being called mad and melancholic and hysteric because this stuff is repressed and like bubbling up.
He also calls her an outsider who is
a victim to not just the vampire but 19th century society, and
a victim of society due to their misunderstanding and dismissal of her true condition, like Sievers, who offers that corset to calm her womb, as though that's the problem. But back to the question, what are they suppressing exactly? The literal answer is her dark spiritual side, but what does that represent in the real world? We'll come back to that question after we address von Franz, the one who treats her with the sympathy and open mind needed to reach an accurate diagnosis. He's the one who orders Sievers and Frederick to untie her and cease their administration of ether. He's the one who asks for her story and uncovers her connection to the spiritual realm. How is he able to do all this? Because he was not restrained by 1838's conception of modern science. In that same BFI interview, Eggers describes the character as railing against Enlightenment. I don't read that as a condemnation of reason and skepticism. Instead, I see it as embracing humility, acknowledging that no matter how far humanity's knowledge comes, there is yet more to be discovered. That means listening, not blindly following a course of treatment that doesn't work. And it means curiosity. The two men of science in Egger's story represent two roles, the practitioner and the pioneer. Sievers follows a manual, practicing what others have prescribed, while von Franz confronts the unknown, hoping to broaden human knowledge. It may seem strange to talk about science when it comes to a Nosferatu, but reason is how they destroy him. They may not understand the underlying physics or biology that allow for the undead to rise, or to die if they do not return to their burying place by sunrise. But it is through investigation and deductive reasoning that von Franz discovers that this is, in fact, the means by which Orlok can be defeated. Von Franz shows humility in his open mind toward whatever might be Ellen's true ailment, and he shows it in his willingness to consider ancient wisdom, now seen as superstition or folklore.
On the one hand, he's following modern science, which is not very modern in 1838, but, okay. And on the other hand, he's remembering that there is good things that, like Paracelsus and people in the past had to say.
Von Franz's humility allows him to consider old ideas. Some may be wrong, but contain a kernel of truth. Some may be accurate in observation, but wrong in explanation. Ultimately, it seems, von Franz doesn't accept any of it as dogmatically true, whether ancient or modern. To be fair, the character also comes across as fairly unhinged and makes ethically questionable decisions, like lying to Thomas, encouraging him to go on a demon hunt as a distraction to prevent him from interfering in Ellen's plot to spend a night distracting Orlok. And when Thomas realizes he has been tricked, von Franz laughs almost maniacally. While Eggers might borrow the language of a fairy tale, of course he draws his characters with complexity. None are entirely perfect or imperfect. Sievers isn't entirely close-minded. After all, he does eventually show humility as well, admitting he does not know the true source of Ellen's ailment. He is the one who eventually reaches out to von Franz, and at that point provides all the assistance he can, following the potentially mad professor's lead. Neither of them are perfect, and neither of them represent their approach to science with perfect precision, but each provides an opportunity to consider different ideas, dogmatically following the current understanding of science versus diving into the unknown, considering ancient wisdom, and confronting impossible supernatural things. Maybe von Franz or Sievers go too far in either direction. Maybe the best approach is something in between. But returning to that question, if Nosferatu is about repression, repression of what? The answer is whatever sits beyond the scope of our manuals. That includes fictional ailments like vampirism, and in the 19th century, it would include real ones, like epilepsy, often misdiagnosed, especially in women, as hysteria. Or it might include depression, thrown into the broad diagnosis of melancholy, not treated but suppressed through ether or simply discouragement. Do not talk about your nightmares. Eggers said that Ellen is partly a victim of 19th century society, but she is not the only victim, because her victimization, going all the way back to her childhood isolation, is what ultimately led to Orlok's arrival in Germany, and he brought disease with him. On an individual level, Ellen suppressing her darkness led to somnambulism and seizures. On a societal level, it led to a town overrun with plague. But who is to blame? No one person can be held to account for society's lack of scientific progress. Thomas and Sievers both played a role in quieting Ellen, though one was following doctor's orders and the other was following common medical training of the time. Though there are some more pure examples of moral failing in the story, like Ellen's father pushing his daughter away out of fear, or one we see more directly, Frederick Harding, Aaron Taylor Johnson's character, who shows little to no sympathy for Ellen's plight. And I think it's no mistake that he pays for his failings dearly, losing his entire family before dying himself. If there's a lesson in Nosferatu, at least in part, it has to be that it's okay if you don't fully comprehend what someone is going through, but it's important to be patient, to take them seriously, and at least attempt to sympathize. In the end, despite society's failings and Orlok's brutality, Ellen takes matters into her own hands. Her connection to Orlok has been a bane, though she realizes not just to her and her loved ones, but also to Orlok himself, because her supernatural connection to him is two-way. By claiming to accept his advances, and thanks to this connection they share, she mesmerizes him for a night. When the sun rises and he is still outside his resting place of dirt, his body finally remembers that it's dead, and the curse is lifted. In several interviews, Eggers mentioned that the final shot of Orlok's decrepit corpse on top of Ellen was his take on a motif that originated in the Renaissance period: Death and the Maiden. As he describes it to USA Today, when you see Lily Rose looking like a doll and Bill looking like a skull with a mustache, it's a powerful contrast. Throughout the story, Orlok calls to mind and represents several things. But one thing Eggers avoids is painting him as a full-fledged character. He is often in the shadows, so we barely look him in the eyes. His motives are not entirely clear. Why is he so drawn to Ellen? We don't know his origins. He even says himself, "I am an appetite, nothing more." Less than a character, he is a force that thirsts for blood. He is the embodiment of evil. And this makes it easier to feel what Eggers intends in those final moments, to see not Count Orlok on top of Ellen, but death itself in her embrace, a primal thing that has come to take life. In most paintings depicting this motif, including the one Eggers credits as the original by Hans Baldung, death is the ultimate victor, taking the maiden's life. In this film's interpretation, yes, Ellen sacrifices herself, but she also does the impossible by taking death with her. As the final shot, it ties the themes together into a lasting, impactful image. Ellen, a victim of repression by a society unwilling and unequipped to deal with her ailment, but also Ellen, using that ailment, her connection to a darkness she cannot fully comprehend, turning it into power over evil. Her death, a reminder of what happens when society fails to listen with empathy and an open mind. Her victory, a reminder that those suffering from something we don't understand are still people with strength and agency. Society's failure to recognize this in Nosferatu manifests as plague and a vampire on a killing spree. In reality, it manifests in other destructive ways beyond the scope of Eggers' story. Because I think that's where he leaves the door open for us to consider the possibilities. But he provides a few hints. We should imagine something as frightening as Count Orlok, the Nosferatu.